Hey guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Huggy Poker Vlog. I recently put out a poll to see what do you all think about the pacing of my vlog. I've had some feedback that some of you think it's too fast, I've had other feedback that some of you think it's great, and I thought putting out a poll would be the best way to see what the consensus is. As you can see, most of you think that the pacing's just right. After that, some of you think it's even too slow, and the smallest number of you think that it's too fast. So given that the overwhelming majority of you think that the pacing's pretty good, I'm gonna stick with that for now, and I'll remind the rest of you that YouTube does have the playback controls for changing the speed that you want to watch a video, so you can make it faster to your liking or slower to your liking. Without further ado, let's get to today's session. The very first hand, we pick up Ace-King offsuit sitting in the cutoff. There's one limp, and I raised to $15. The small blind, big blind, and limp are all call, so we've got 4 players headed to the flop. The flop comes 8-6-4 with 2 clubs, so we whiff, and when everyone checks to us, I'm happy to check this one back and take the free card. The turn brings the beautiful King of Diamonds, giving us top. The small blind, who is an older gentleman who will be in a number of hands this session with us, leads out for $35. Both other players fold, and I call in position. The river brings the 10 of spades, and our opponent makes a tiny $15 bet, which looks exactly like a blocking bet in hopes of getting a cheap showdown. I want to get value from our hand, so I raise it up to 75. We get a pretty quick call, and I show him the bad news. We take down the first hand of the night.
Take it.
Just 3 hands later, we pick up pocket kings in the +2 position. There's a $5 straddle, and when it folds to us, I raise to 15. The big blind and the straddle both call, so we're 3 ways to the flop. The flop comes 8-3-10 with 2 hearts. There's no ace, and I'm happy to continue betting here. Both players check, and I make it $30. We get 2 calls, so we're headed to the turn, which brings the 6 of clubs. This should really only help someone holding a hand like 9-7 or perhaps 8-6, but I'm happy to continue betting here when both players check again. I make it $75. The big blind goes all in for 88 total, and the straddle, after asking,
That's a dead raise, bro.
makes the call. We can't raise here to protect our hand, so I make the call as well, and we're all headed to the river, which brings the Queen of Spades. The straddle throws his hand into the muck as soon as he sees the river, so we just have to hope we're good versus the big blind. I show our kings, and he shows Jack 10 suited and hearts for top pair with a flush draw on the flop, so we're pretty lucky to fade a lot of outs there. We take down another nice pot early in the session. We drop about $125 with miscellaneous hands that warrant raising or seeing a flop, but unfortunately don't connect before this next interesting hand. We pick up Ace-7 offsuit in the button. There's 3 limps, and I raise to 17 in position. The big blind and 2 of the limpers call, so we've got 4 of us headed to the flop. The flop comes Jack, Queen, King, Rainbow. Everyone checks to us, and this board should smash our raising range, so I make an optimistic c-bet for $35. Just the first limper calls, so we're heads up to the turn, which brings the 6 of spades. Now the limper leads out for $45. It's such a small bet relative to the pot, and it feels similar to a lot of blocking bets I've seen hoping to get a cheap showdown. Given that this board should hit our range harder than most hands I expect a limp to show up with here, I feel like we could turn our hand into a bluff. Our opponent's got another 183 behind, and given the size of the pot, I go ahead and push all in. We unfortunately get snap called. He quickly flips over Ace-10 for the flop straight, and we're drawing dead to 3 outs for a chop. The river brings the Queen of Clubs, and we miss. So, big mistake on my end here. I should have been willing to cut my losses when he let out on the turn. About 15 minutes later, we pick up pocket queens in the cutoff. The hijack limps, and I raise it up to $12. Unfortunately, we don't get any action, which is always a bummer when you pick up a premium pair. 30 minutes later, we pick up King-9 suited under the gun. We haven't played a single hand in the past 30 minutes, so I decide to go ahead and make a loose raise up to $10. The player behind us raises to 30, and the cutoff cold calls. With the cold call in there, I decide to join since we're getting a bit of a better price, and I throw the extra 20 in. The flop comes Jack 6-9 Rainbow, so we flop second pair, and I go ahead and check the pre-flop raiser. He checks as well, and the cold caller bets 1/3 pot for $30. Like I said, we've got second pair, and it's on a pretty wet board. I think there are some draws that could be opening in position here, so I go ahead and make the call. The pre-flop raiser calls as well, so we're all headed to the turn where we spike the King of Spades, giving us 2 pair. I don't mind checking here again since the player in position has a short stack, and I have a feeling he's planning to get it in here. With that, I check, the pre-flop raiser checks, and the in-position player pushes as expected for 83 total. We're obviously not folding here, but I don't want to give the pre-flop raiser good odds to call with any kind of draw, so I push over the top for our last $188. He folds, so we get a river heads up, which brings the 5 of spades. I announce our hand, and our opponent shows Jack-9 for a smaller 2 pair. So we got pretty fortunate to hit a 3-outer on the turn against him. 4 hands later, we pick up ace-jack offsuit. There's 3 limps, and I raise it up to 20 from the cutoff. The button and small blind both call, and now the big blind, who's been very tight, 3-bets to 100. It folds back to us, and given just how tight this player's been, and the fact that he's out of position, I give him credit for a better hand and toss this one in. We pick up a few small pots from some not too exciting hands before this next hand happens. We've got Queen 10 suited in the +2 position. The first player limps in, and I raise to $12. The hijack calls, and the small blind raises it up to 41. It folds back to us, and yeah, I probably should fold, but this guy's been playing pretty loosey-goosey, so I decide to join along. The hijack, the old man who's been calling pretty wide and loose since I sat down, joins along too, so we've got 3 players to the flop, which comes 10-9-8 with 2 clubs. The small blind, who 3-bet pre-flop, now checks into us. Given how loose he's been, this smells like overcards at best. With top pair and a gut shot, I'm happy to lead out into both these players, and I make it $50. The player behind us fold, and the pre-flop raiser calls, which makes me think we're good here. The turn brings the 9 of spades, and he checks again. I'm happy to continue charging him to outdraw us, so I make it 65. He quickly folds, and we take it down. 4 hands later, we pick up ace-king suited in the small blind. The old guy and the loosey-goosey player both limp in, and I raise to 22 out of position. Just the older guy calls, so we're heads up to the flop, which comes ace-high. I c-bet for $20 with our top pair top kicker, and he makes the call. The turn brings the 3 of diamonds. This guy's shown a propensity to bet when checked to, so I go with a check with the intention of check raising. He makes it 25, and I raise it up to 75. He almost beats me into the pot with a call, and the river brings the 7 of spades. I bet once more, making it 100 this time, and he snap calls. I show our hand, and he mucks. Our hand is good.
Thank you.
15 minutes later, we're sitting in the big blind, and we've got 10-7 offsuit. The old guy raises to 7, the loosey-goosey guy calls, and I don't mind getting into a pot with these guys, so I join along for only $5 more. The flop comes ace-10-7 rainbow, so we flop a pretty disguised bottom 2 pair. I check to the old guy with the intention of check raising, and he c-bets for 15. The loosey-goosey player calls quickly, and I raise it up to 50. Both players call, and we're headed to the turn, which brings the 9 of clubs. This probably doesn't change much, but I'm willing to slow down a little given the amount of interest. We're obviously losing to just about any other 2-pair combination, which one of these players could hold. I check to the old guy, who checks as well, and the loosey-goosey player goes all in for 115 total. I feign like I'm thinking since there's still another player in the hand, but I'm planning to call here either way. The old guy folds his hand, so we're heads up with no more action to the river, which bricks out with the deuce of clubs. He shows ace-3 for top pair, and our hand is good.
Thank you.
30 minutes later, we've got queen 10 suited in the big blind. The old guy raises to 15 from the +1 seat. The middle position player calls, the loosey-goosey player calls, the button calls, the small blind calls, and I call as well. The 6 of us head to the flop, which brings jack-7 deuce all clubs. So we flop a flush. We check to the pre-flop raiser, who makes a very small c-bet for $16. It folds back to the small blind, who calls, and since this old guy doesn't seem to like folding, I raise it up to 85. Unfortunately, our bet was a bit too big as both players fold, but I'm happy to take another pot down. 4 hands later, we pick up pocket aces in the hijack. I'm cool as a cucumber, but my camera can't contain this excitement. The loosey-goosey player straddles, it folds to us, and I raise it up to 16. It folds back to loosey-goosey, who pushes all in for 251 total.
All in tonight.
All in? I call.
Call. All right. Whoa. Leave it in front of us.
Oh, shit, it's tough one to beat.
I've lost with aces before. We flop a set and hit a boat, so I'm feeling pretty confident here, and he shows that he pushed with pocket 8s. Our hand is obviously good, and we scoop a big one with minimal effort. 10 minutes later, we've got ace-4 suited on the button. There's 3 limpers, and I raise it up to 16 in position. The big blind and the last limper both call, so we're 3 ways to the flop, which comes 6 queen 9 rainbow. Both players check, and I should probably be c-betting here since this does hit my range, but in the moment I decided to check back. The turn brings the 3 of hearts. The big blind checks, and now the limper leads for 21. At the time, I think I was expecting there are some draws that could semi-bluff here, and that ace-high could still be good, and for that reason I went with a call. In hindsight, I think giving up here is better play after my check back on the flop. The river brings the 8 of spades, and now he leads for 70. It's such an odd spot, it really feels like a bluff unless he has a hand like Jack 10 that got there. I deliberate for a bit and eventually call as a bluff catcher. Unfortunately for us, he shows a Jack 9 for second pair and we muck. Obviously not a good play by me, an embarrassing one to be honest, but I make dumb mistakes too. I'm still learning, and I'm keeping it real by including it in here. The very next hand we pick up King Jack offsuit in the cutoff. There's 3 limps, and I raised to $15. The button, small blind, and all 3 limpers call, so we've got 6 players headed to the flop. The flop comes 8 King 8 rainbow, so we hit top pair, but with the number of players in the pot, someone could easily have outflopped us with an 8 in their hand. It checks around to us, and given that we're either way ahead or way behind, I'm happy to check this one back. We head to the turn, which brings the 4 of diamonds. The old guy, who's first to act, leads out for $21. Just the player on our right calls, and I call as well since we underrepped our hand on the flop. The river brings the 3 of diamonds, and now the old guy leads out for $50. I'd maybe consider calling him if the third player folded, but the decision becomes a lot easier when the player on our right pushes all in for about 197 total. I throw our hand away, and the old guy thinks surprisingly long before making the call. The old guy flop trips and backdoor to flush, so I'm happy we were able to get away without putting any more chips in the pot. 15 minutes later, we pick up pocket jacks in the small blind. 2 players limp in, the button raises to 12, and we've got jiggities, so the price of poker is going up. We make it $50, and just the button calls, so we're heads up to the flop. The flop comes 8-9-5 with 2 spades. I c-bet for 65, and we take it down.
Back yeah. Back.
Thank you.
The very next hand, we've got ace-7 suited on the button. There's 2 limps, and I raise it up to 15 in position. The old man calls from the big blind as always, both limpers call, and the 4 of us head to the flop. The flop comes deuce ace 4 with 2 diamonds, so we flop top pair, and when everyone checks to us, I'm happy to c-bet here. I make it 35, and just the old guy calls, so we're heads up now. The turn brings the 3 of spades. This is obviously not a great card for us, as there's a 4-liner to a straight out there now. The old guy checks, and I'm happy to check this one back. The river brings the 6 of diamonds, and he quickly leads for $41. This is probably the worst card in the deck for us, assuming we weren't already behind. It's certainly a better card for his range, meaning even if he doesn't have the straight, he could have 2 pair. The flush comes in as well, and literally any other ace beats us at this point. Unfortunately, there's not much to do but throw our hand away.
I don't think I really beat anything. Nice hand.
The very next hand, we've got Jack 9 suited in the cutoff. There's 2 limps, and I raise it up to $12. The player behind us 3 bets to 35. Folds back to us, and I decide to defend here, as our opponent says,
I'm making the
You
ball.
and me. I'll even check dark to you. How about that?
The flop comes 8-4-10 rainbow, so we flop an open-ended straight draw, and I don't mind continuing here for the right price. I check, and we see a pretty small c-bet for only $20. I'm definitely calling here, and we head to the turn where we see the ace of diamonds. So now we've got a flush draw to go with our straight draw. I lead out for 30, which in retrospect does not accomplish a damn thing other than maybe pricing us in for a cheap river if he just calls, and of course, he does just that. The river brings the 8 of hearts, so we miss both our draws, it goes check, and our opponent shows pocket jacks for the win. About 20 minutes later, we pick up Jack 10 suited. There's 2 limps, and I raise it up to $15 in the cutoff. The button, small blind, and both limpers call, so the 5 of us are headed to the flop. And the flop's a pretty good one when it comes 10-4 deuce with 2 spades. So we've got top pair and a flush draw to go with it. It checks to us, and I c-bet for about half pot, $35. The older gentleman in the small blind and the middle position player both call, so we've got 3 of us headed to the turn, which brings the 5 of diamonds. Both players check again, and I'm happy to keep firing here. I make it $80, and just the small blind calls, so we're heads up to the river where we catch our flush when it brings the 5 of spades. He checks to us one last time, and I make it $125. He thinks for a solid minute, plays with his chips like he's considering a call, and folds. We didn't get any more value, unfortunately, but we scoop a pretty big pot nonetheless. The very next hand, we've got ace 3 offsuit in the hijack. The middle position player limps in, and I raise it up to 15. The old guy calls from the button, and the limper calls as well, so the 3 of us head to the flop. It comes down ace high, and although I should be betting here with top pair, at the time I was thinking that I don't want to bloat the pot with a weak ace versus a player who could have a bigger ace. I think this thinking is probably flawed, especially versus the older guy who seems to be playing any 2 cards against me at this point. I think a better option is to just be putting money in the pot for value. The old guy makes it $20, and I'm definitely calling here. We're heads up to the turn now where we see the deuce of clubs. I check once more, and the old guy makes it $60 now. I've seen him make small blocking bets when he's out of position, but he's in position this time, so I'm not sure if this large bet sizing is strength or an attempt to get me off my hand. I call once more with the idea that I'll reevaluate on the river. The river brings the 7 of clubs, and I want a cheap showdown, so I put out a blocking bet of $35. He pretty quickly calls, and we see the bad news when he flips over 9 deuce for a turned 2 pair. The very next hand, we've got ace king suited in middle position. The player in our right limps, and I raise it up to 15. Unsurprisingly, the old guy calls since he's getting involved in pretty much every pot with us, and we're heads up to the flop. The flop comes 6-9 king rainbow, so we've got top, and I c-bet for 20. He snap calls, and we're headed to the turn. The turn brings the king of clubs, so we pick up trips, and I check here to see if we can get a bet out of him. He quickly makes it 32, and I just call in hopes of letting him continue his line on the river. The river brings the 7 of clubs. I check once more, and unfortunately he checks back. He shows 8-6 for bottom pair, and we take down a pot that's probably a little smaller than we could have won here. 3 hands later, we pick up king queen offsuit under the gun. I raise it up to $10, and we get 5 callers, so the 6 of us head to a flop of deuce 7 king with 2 diamonds. The small blind checks, and the big blind leads for $20. With top pair second kicker, I want to protect our hand and get value from weaker kings, so I raise it up to 70. It folds back the big blind, who eventually makes the call. The turn brings the deuce of spades, pairing the board. This is pretty much a brick, so I'm happy to get it in here against weaker kings. Our opponent checks to us, and I make it 125. After some thinking, he goes all in for only $100 more, so I snap call. The river brings the 7 of spades. I show our hand, and he shows king deuce offsuit for a flopped 2 pair turned boat. Ouch. Not what I was expecting to see here. 10 minutes later, we've got queen 10 offsuit in the +2 position. It folds to us, and I make an admittedly loose raise, being one of the big stacks at the table, making it $10. Just the old guy calls, so we're heads up once again. The flop comes 10 high, giving us top pair, though it is a coordinated board. I'm not too worried about the coordination of it though, given this player seems to be playing any 2 cards against us. I c-bet for $15, and we get a quick call. The turn brings the king of spades. Against most players, this card probably doesn't change much, though I'm less certain about this old guy who could have anything. I'm happy to continue betting though, rather than give a free card, and I up the bet to $25. We get another quick call, and the river brings the 4 of spades. I check with the intention of calling any bet, and he makes it $33. I call, and he flips over 10-4 offsuit for the river 2 pair. Like I said, this guy is playing quite literally any 2 cards against us, and he unfortunately hit a 3-outer against us this time. We're card dead for about a half hour until this next hand. We've got 7-5 offsuit in the cutoff. There's 3 limps, and we've been folding for 30 minutes straight, so I get a little bored and decide to limp along too. The small blind completes, the button checks, and we've got 6 players heading to the flop in position. The flop comes deuce ace 7 with 2 hearts. Everyone checks to us, and I throw out a bet of $10 with second pair. Just the initial limper call, so we're heads up to the turn, which brings a pretty nice 7 of diamonds, giving us trips. Our opponent now leads for $20. I think our hand is strong enough that it warrants a raise, plus it's a bit disguised if he thought we were betting with an ace on the flop, so I raise it up to 60. He makes the call, and we're headed to the river where we see the 8 of hearts completing the flush. He checks once more, and he doesn't have much left, only $83 behind. I expect if he hit the flush, he probably would have pushed, so I'm not too worried about that. I push all in with him covered, not wanting to miss any value. We get snap called, which doesn't bode well for us. I show our hand, and he shows king 7 for trips with a better kicker. Man, that 7 is the only card that gets us to put more money in behind. This session is going downhill. To be fair, I probably shouldn't be playing 7-5 offsuit in the first place, so I can only blame myself. Another 30 minutes passes before we pick up ace-king offsuit in the small blind. There's a $5 straddle, the hijack raises to 15, and I 3-bet to 55. The old guy, who loves playing any 2 cards against us, cold calls, and the original raiser calls as well, so the 3 of us head to the flop, which comes 5-10 queen rainbow. It's not a great flop for us. There's a lot of cards out there that favor our opponents, and we've just got a gut shot with 2 overcards. We can't continue here, especially being out of position, so I check to our opponents, who surprisingly both check back. The turn bricks out with the 4 of clubs, effectively changing nothing. I check once more, and now the old guy bets out for $41. The third player calls, and while either player could have a pair at this point, neither hand seems particularly strong. We could realistically have up to 10 outs with 3 aces, 3 kings, and 4 jacks, giving us about 2.5 to 1 odds of making our hand. Given the pot size, we're getting a price that's 6 to 1, so this is actually a pretty straightforward call. The river brings the ace of hearts, so we hit our pair, but king jack also gets there, and we're still potentially behind 2 pair. I check, and the old guy bets out for $100. The third player eventually folds, and now it's back on us. I think for probably longer than I should. I didn't call the turn just to fold the river, but the bet also looks pretty strong. I eventually decide that this guy's playing a wide enough range that I can't lay this down, so I make the call. He shows ace 9 for top pair, worst kicker, and our hand is good.
Nice. Thank you. Ooh. Thank you.
We actually played for about 2 more hours after the last hand you just watched, but there was nothing too eventful that came out of it. We picked up a few big hands which unfortunately didn't connect, and our stack dwindled a little bit throughout the end of the night. In the end, we bought in for $300, we cashed out for $874, and after fees we saw a profit of $497. So not as big of a win compared to where we were earlier in the night. We were sitting at a stack close to $1,450, I'd say, but still happy to take the win. That brings the bankroll up to about 15.3K, so we are inching closer to our 25K goal for 2022. As always, thanks for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button, it really helps the channel out. Leave a comment, I'll get back to you as I always do, and otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.